In June 2026, SpaceX is going to have probably its most important launch, its IPO. The initial public offering is scheduled to raise probably $1.5 to $2 trillion, by far the biggest one ever, and an important milestone in investment history. Of all the questions and all the commentary going on, one of the most important and the one that's not being asked and answered effectively right now is why now? Why is Elon Musk choosing to take SpaceX public in June of 2026 and not in June of 2023 or June of 2028? When we answer that question, we'll get a better sense for what's going on inside Musk's head and what it means to you. So let's get into it now. I'm Jason Voiovich. I'm an innovation timing expert, and I am obsessed with the idea of when. Why are things happening at the time they're happening, and what can that tell us about what we should be doing and how we should be thinking differently? So I have been following the SpaceX launch of its IPO for the past couple of years as the commentary has heated up. And now that there's a filing with the SEC, and we're planning to have that launch sometime in June, the exact date, I suppose, to be determined as of the recording of this video, the commentary has been, I don't want to say disappointing, but I'm going to say disappointing. And it seems to center around a few different things. There's the concept of the data center in space, and that sort of makes sense given how difficult it has been to build new data centers on the ground recently. Some communities are pushing back on all the electricity they need and the tax situation going on. So that's certainly an issue. There is Elon Musk's thoughts about colonizing Mars and some of the new Artemis missions to the moon. Those obviously are interesting as well. There's plenty of commentary around how big this will be and that this is in the trillions of dollars and might surpass $2 trillion for an initial public offering. That's a big deal, obviously, but is it really that big of a deal considering forthcoming IPOs from some of the big AI companies? I'm not so sure. There's other commentary around who's in, who's out in terms of the big investment brokerage firms. And bluntly, should you be, as an investor, should you be interested in that? Or as a consumer, should you really care anything at all about what Elon Musk is doing and what's going on with SpaceX? And speaking of Elon Musk specifically, not a little bit of the commentary has focused on people who either like Elon Musk, don't like Elon Musk, or are on some side of the political divide. There's a lot of commentary and a lot of punditry, but not a lot of answers. So what I want to do today is break down the timing questions on why Elon Musk is deciding to do this now, what it means for you, and how to apply that same methodology to really any sort of big decision from a competitor, another IPO. They all think about things the same way. So let's break it down. The first thing we have to realize about time and timing is that time and the question of why now isn't one question, it's three questions. Because time has three dimensions. Time has a chronological dimension, a sequential dimension, and a perceptual dimension. And I'm going to hit each one of those in turn with some data that will help us understand the SpaceX situation. First things first, let's look at chronological time. That's just the days, the weeks, the months, the years. What's interesting on the screen here that I'm showing is data that I found from the SEC's website. You can go here and you can look at it yourself. It's the number of IPOs by year over the past 25 years. What's interesting about this is a couple of things. One, you'll notice that there was a big spike in the number of IPOs around the pandemic, 2020, 2021. Big spike, and then pretty much a return to baseline throughout that time. A little bit of variation from year to year, but even with the recession in '08, not the same sort of sustained dip or sustained rise. When you actually pull down the data, and there's a little spot in there where you can actually download the data, and I'd recommend that you do that because there's additional layers in that data on, what's going on in terms of by industry, by state. What's really critical, though, is if you take a look at 24 and 25, the last 2 years where we have full data, what's interesting is that 25 and 38% respectively for 2024 and 2025 are from SPACs. They're special purpose acquisition companies, essentially finding ways to generate public capital so that they can go public within a couple of years, or they have to return their money to their shareholders. There's been a lot of speculation about that type of investment vehicle and some different issues with that. But bottom line is, if you remove the SPAC numbers from 2024 and 2025, you discover that it's essentially flat. After the spike in 2021, it's been basically flat since then. So from a investor perspective, there really isn't a good sense for why now, from a chronological perspective, there isn't a lot of IPO activity right now, and there hasn't been for a few years. So is Elon Musk thinking about this is the right time after that big spike and a lower annual trend line? Perhaps, but I'm not sure that's really the big thing. If you dig beneath the annual data, you start to get a month-by-month look. Investors will do an IPO at any month of the year, but they tend to cluster around the spring, kind of March, April, May, and September, October. You want to avoid the dip in the summer. You want to avoid the holidays. So if you think about that, I think that gives us a little bit more insight into what's going on. So we're a little bit late from the spring peak, such as there would have been. There really wasn't this year, but we're a little bit past that time period. But what you don't want to do is get into July and August, where lots of people are on vacation, and you might artificially reduce the amount of investor interest. You certainly don't want that. So you'd have to wait until September or October to do that. So again, if there's a cash flow crunch, or Elon Musk wants to make sure to bring that capital into the organization sooner rather than later, now would be the time versus waiting 3 to 4 months, because you're not going to do it around July, around the 4th of July holiday, and August is a bit of a dead month to do that. So again, chronological time gives us a little bit of a framing on when during the year an IPO is more likely to happen, and then what does that trend line look like? If there are a lot of IPOs tend to beget other IPOs. So if the trend line is going up, that can be a reason to do that as well. But Elon Musk is an independent-minded person, so I doubt that that had a lot to do with the decision. But it's important for you to know that there are patterns that make sense for IPOs. Let's move on to sequential time. Now, this isn't the standard stuff, that there are filings that have to be done, there are disclosures that need to be made. That's the standard stuff. Anyone who's investing in an IPO should understand what all those are and should be reviewing those details. What I'm talking about more are the sequential steps that got you to the point where you decided to do an IPO or make a major decision like this. A few things really come to mind. SpaceX has been launching new rockets in sequence, the Starship 2, and most recently, Starship 3. Now, that one, from a outward perspective, may not have been a success. I know that the idea is to be able to capture that rocket with a pair of arms and really reduce the cost of launching rockets into space. He has been able to demonstrate that in a couple of other places, but this is one of the largest rockets and one of the ones that is being considered to take the next round of human astronauts to land on the moon. So again, big deal that this is successful. I would call this a qualified success, certainly. Most of my friends who do a lot more with space exploration and rocketry know a bit more about that than I do. But again, even a failure gives you a lot of information that you can use to refine and go to the next step. So I think the key thing is taking a look at major milestones, especially with flagship offerings like Starship. And that's something that you can think about as well with any competitive situation you're looking at. What milestones have been made that would give you a sense that they're ready to take the next leap? and that they're very confident in that. IPO is a signal to the market that you're confident in your next steps. So meeting those milestones is critical. Now, had Starship 3 exploded on the pad, that might have been different. You could see where we would have waited from June maybe into the September, October timeframe when there could have been another success or another launch in between there that could have changed that perspective. You want to make sure that as investors take a look at the IPO, they're looking at the major successful milestone right before that. That's key. And that brings us to perceptual time. This is what time means to people. This is what's in people's head. And if there is commentary that's talking about timing at all, it usually has to do with perceptual time in terms of how investors are feeling about this. And what's interesting, of course, is many of them sort of miss the point that it does seem to me that what Elon Musk is banking on is energy around the artificial intelligence hype cycle. Now, you see lots of organizations do this. They are aligning themselves to AI in one sense or another, which is smart because it's increasing their valuation. When I was working in telecom and fiber optics in the 1990s, everyone had E in front of their name for electronic. You could get a 20% bump on your stock just for putting E in front of your name or by indicating to the market that you were working on some web-based initiative. It's the same thing here. So watch for those sorts of things. I don't really think that's Elon Musk's key idea here is to align with AI necessarily. It's more about making sure that he is hooking his wagon to something that is big. I think there is a critical logic in going first for something like this to make sure that you get the money, all that capital comes into the organization before the bubble would pop. I think that he's making a really smart move on the timing of that from a perceptual perspective. Here's the thing, though. The most important thing to think about isn't why now necessarily. It's what's next. So let's think a little bit about what that means for you as a consumer, for you as an investor, or for you as an innovator, thinking about what does the SpaceX IPO mean 6 months from now, once the IPO has happened, versus why is it happening in the next few weeks? I think there's certainly some truth to the idea that data centers could become orbital, meaning that we have data centers orbiting in space as probably an adjunct to ground-based data centers working in tandem. I don't think it's an either or, it's very likely an and. I think the next one is the Artemis mission, of course, with NASA. And SpaceX is competing with Blue Origin, that's Jeff Bezos, Amazon's company, and others to build the rockets that will take astronauts to the moon. Obviously, that is a huge win for whatever company gets that contract. And if they are flying Starship 5 or Starship 6, that's a major win for SpaceX going into the future. That's obviously interesting because we know with prior space exploration that it has generated a ton of follow-on innovation. What I think is interesting as well is the satellites like Starlink that are beginning to compete with ground-based fiber optics and ground-based telecommunications networks. I think being able to decouple your telephone service, your internet service from the cable companies and from internet service providers that are ground-based and being able to have competition that is space-based is going to provide not only great coverage wherever you are, but likely drive costs down to increased competition. Who has not seen their internet service bill go up in the last few years? I know I have. When you think about timing, it's not just a question of why now and the factors that are getting you to that time. Always be thinking about what time represents from this point forward, and you start to get a much better idea of how you as an innovator, you as a consumer, or you as an investor are going to make smart decisions going forward. So what are your thoughts on Elon Musk and what he's doing with SpaceX? Drop them in the comments, and I'll respond to some of those in the comments or maybe on a future video. Until then, see you on the next one.